Good evening, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm Valerie Horvath, and I'm with Balance in Mind, which is a grassroots group founded by parents. Our mission is to destigmatize talking about mental health. So tonight's forum is the first in a series of conversations we will be having in upcoming weeks about the links between mental health, drugs, and harm reduction. We have 90 minutes tonight to give you an overview about what is happening with teens right now. And I know you will have questions. So we will be handling questions by having you enter them in the chat box or in the Q&A. We have people monitoring that. And we are planning on holding answers until all the speakers have had a chance to talk tonight. And we are lucky and very grateful to have the group of speakers that we do with us tonight. Let me give you a quick overview of who is here. Christy Nicholson will be facilitating tonight. She is with Youth Eastside Services. She has extensive experience in mental health and substance use counseling, and she is the Director of School-Based Services for YES, which is important because it has behavioral health support specialists in the Lake Washington School District, elementary, middle school, and choice schools. As a side note, high schools also have access to mental health specialists, and they're provided by Evergreen Health social workers. Rob Davis is a Lake Washington High School parent, and last month he tragically lost his stepson, Oliver. He would like to share his story with you tonight, and will be speaking about how a combination of mental health, access to drugs, and a firearm resulted in this tragedy. Out of respect for the family, he's not going to be discussing specifics tonight. And we very much thank Rob for his openness and his courage. Kaylin Griffith is a behavioral health support specialist from Youth Eastside Services, and she provides co-occurring education and prevention and counseling to two Lake Washington School District middle schools, Kamiakin and Finn Hills. So parents may in fact recognize Kaylin. Officer King, who is here and is lovingly referred to as Officer Kang because of his assignment as the SRO to Lake Washington High School, has over 21 years experience in law, the last 9 of which have been in Kirkland Police Department as a school resource officer. And he talks in the community about school safety, teen violence, and substance education. Andrea Frost has been working as a substance use disorder professional and substance abuse education and prevention coordinator with Youth Eastside Services for over 19 years. She works at Redmond and Eastlake High Schools as a prevention intervention specialist, where she currently supports students and families by connecting them to YES and community resources. And finally, Susie Kroll brings experience both as a mental health professional and with law enforcement. Recognizing that law enforcement responds to mental health crises often without mental health professionals, she started a co-responding mental health professional in 6 local police departments. She now works with Redmond as their co-responding mental health professional and community support administrator. She speaks nationally on crisis response, mental health, and de-escalation. Thank you, everyone, parents, community members, and our speakers tonight for being here with us. It's an important conversation to have, and know it can be a difficult conversation. And that's partly why we would like to cover just a few housekeeping things. This forum is purely for educational purposes. There is no intent to form a client-therapist relationship. The forum and any services associated with it, including but not exclusive to open office hours, social media posts, and any other form of communication, are for educational purposes only. Tonight's content may be distressing or triggering. If you find that you are in need of speaking to someone during the forum, please use the chat box to talk to the panelists and send a message to them, and we will connect you with someone that you can speak to. If you need immediate support or are in crisis, text 741-741 for the crisis text line, or call Crisis Connections at 866-4-CRISIS at any time. Please know again, this is a safe space. It's a difficult conversation, and we want you to be honest, but we ask that everyone be respectful and kind to each other as well. And with that said, Christy.
Does help to unmute itself. As Valerie mentioned, Rob and his family, several of whom are with us this evening. So his wife and Oliver's mother, Elizabeth, his son, Blue, and their son, Ben. And their family on January 4th lost their son in a perfect and awful storm of events, as Valerie mentioned. It's a story that's painful to hear and necessary to hear. Painful because it evokes for all of us our sense of common loss and our fear of loss and all the emotions that are associated with that. Necessary because it speaks to the realities that our young people confront and make decisions about on a daily basis. All our young people. It's not a matter of good or bad, troubled or not. It's all of our young people. As parents, it's natural for us to feel distress and anxiety in the face of these realities. To say, not my child, and to hope that somehow we will be spared, that somehow we are different. But when we do that, we rob ourselves and our children of our very important ability to support our youth as they confront these realities of mental health, drugs, and safety. I want to thank Rob and his family for the courage and generosity to be here and to speak out and to take a step towards breaking that fear and stigma connected to these realities. And thank you for the courage of those who join us here today. Rob.
Thank you for that introduction. Forgive me, it's been a while since I've given a presentation like at all. Good evening, my name is Rob Davis, and I'm here to speak to the 3 points of tonight's community forum: teen drug use, teen mental issues, and firearm safety. Unfortunately, tonight, I have experience in all 3 of these topics. I am in active recovery and have been attempting to get clean and sober since 2010. When I attend AA and NA meetings and there's a speaker, he or she usually gives their pedigree. The pedigree is what and why they're in front of me speaking and why I should be listening. So here's mine. I was born and raised in a family that believed drug and alcohol use was normal and acceptable. There were many secrets in our family. Drug, alcohol, sexual, mental, and physical abuse was the daily norm. My father believed these things were running rampant out in the world and that we were going to be exposed to this out there. So he thought might as well see firsthand in the home what it would be like, where he convinced us all that it would be safer. He was dead wrong. I took my sister off life support in 2006 after she went brain dead from shooting up a mixture of heroin and cocaine. My oldest brother died in prison in 2012 from a heroin overdose. My older brother just got out of prison after serving 13 years in prison for violent crimes. My younger brother is still in prison for drug-related crimes. My youngest brother is still recovering after being shot with an AK-47 during a drug-induced confrontation. Shortly after being released from trying to get better from the hospital, he went on another meth binge and burned his mother's house to the ground, killing a family dog. 2 of my sister's kids have died or been in and out of prison with drug issues. And a couple of my older kids have also battled addiction over the years. I've been around drugs all of my life. I know the signs, I know the consequences, I know the destructive path the drugs and alcohol leave in its wake. When I came into Oliver's life in 2015, I found a very normal family, Oliver and Benjamin's father passed away unexpectedly a couple years before, but the whole family seemed to be moving forward, a little sad, but moving forward in life, in a positive manner. Oliver was a very quiet kid. I coached him and Benjamin in flag football, and Oliver and Benjamin became black belts in martial arts. Oliver and Ben did most everything together. In high school, Oliver finally convinced mom to let him play tackle football, and he did. Backup quarterback, tight end, all kinds of things. At the end of the sophomore year, he received the most improved player from the King coaching staff. He also enjoyed track, and he did well, and he was getting better. In the fall of 2019, Oliver's grades started falling in subjects he typically excelled in. As parents, we thought maybe there was something going on in the background, but we weren't sure what it was. This was the first time I suspected that he may be experimenting with drugs. I had no proof, just suspicions. Just from my personal experience, I thought, but nothing for real. Oliver was free to use our car. We had a 2000 Impala. Basically, it was his. On his 16th birthday, he could use it whenever, however. He crashed our Subaru the first day, but it was just a day. A little while later, Oliver was taking some friends home, and he spun out on a wet road, seemed normal. I got him out. This was back in the year ago, December. We didn't think much of it because roads were wet, no problem. As a family, we felt that the independence that Oliver was given was a good, positive thing. And we just continued with that. We kept an eye on him, but didn't have anything else to worry about. And then in May of 2019, shortly after school was canceled due to COVID, Oliver and two of his closest friends in the Impala went on a very dangerous journey. Sorry. As many times before, Oliver went to hang out with these friends, and while driving Kirkland, he decided to do a U-turn in the middle of the street. He clipped a car that he thought was unoccupied on the side of the road. It turned out to be very occupied. They drove away without stopping. The occupants called the police. The Kirkland Police Department caught up with them in downtown Kirkland. Oliver attempted to elude, but was trapped in the underground parking garage at the Kirkland Library. The police let him go without issuing a citation or anything. I requested the police hold on to Oliver till I get there. I was 5 minutes away, but they released him anyways. So instead of coming home, Oliver dropped his two friends off at their houses, and he decided to go down to Portland and hang a left and went about 2 hours east. While doing an estimated 100 miles an hour, he smashed the Impala head into the Meridian 3 times, totaling the Impala, almost died. The Oregon State Police patrolman that found him said he'd been running that road 20 years and he thought for sure Oliver was dead or should be dead, but Oliver didn't have a scratch. When we got Oliver from the hospital, they gave us a bag of drug paraphernalia, which appeared to be cartridges for dabbing and liquid marijuana. So when we got home, we spoke to Oliver, tried to figure out what was going on, what happened, what was the catalyst, because he crashed the car before, no big deal. We didn't punish him. It wasn't, we didn't know why he did what he did. He said it was because of the marijuana, and he told us that he started doing the marijuana after his grades were taking a dive. So we kind of thought about it, Elizabeth and myself, and we thought maybe a therapist would be a good idea. He hadn't really talked about his father's death. And so we thought, let's give him the option. He took it, and he'd been seeing the therapist up until his death. So fast forward to still in the COVID pandemic. He's still not having a normal lifestyle. Let's go to Monday, January 4th. It truly was a normal day. We just got back from Orcas Island after celebrating Benjamin's 13th birthday and the New Year. We got back that Saturday. Oliver stayed home the weekend, didn't see any of his friends. He'd set up to meet with them Monday afternoon after school. At 2 o'clock, Ben and Mom went out to do a 10-minute errand down the street. They both saw Oliver, didn't think anything strange. At 2:10, Oliver came down to the garage where I was working, spoke to him for a second about nothing meaningful, and I asked him to take some Christmas decorations up to the attic. He said, no problem, said goodbye, grabbed the container and went up. At 2:15, Ben and Mom came home. Shortly thereafter, Ben came running down to the garage screaming that Oliver had fallen off the ladder and hit his head. And I didn't think anything about it because the ladder wasn't too tall, too big, and couldn't have fallen that far. I walked up to Oliver's room and immediately heard Mom screaming to call 911. And again, I didn't think nothing of it. But then I heard the brain piercing scream, and I called 911 at 9:17. Oliver was dead by 2:20. The police found, after checking out his room, they found bags which appeared to be bath salts. The envelope said marked 1 of 4. Each bag said 50 milligrams, or this bag said 50 milligrams times 10 equals 500 milligrams, along with other cartridges of marijuana and other miscellaneous things. Oliver shot himself with my handgun that I owned and was licensed. I have a concealed weapons permit. Oliver found that firearm in what I thought was a very secure location. It was a custom-built hidden compartment in our walk-in closet. It never crossed my mind that Oliver would even know that the compartment existed, that the handgun existed, that I had gotten rid of many of my guns 6 months before. So he should have never even thought about that. Mom didn't know I had the gun. Oliver was he must have completely torn apart that closet looking for that. And I still will never know. I can't fathom what happened, but I'm going to tell you right now, not having an actual trigger lock on that firearm will be the single greatest mistake in my life. Oliver and his friends didn't take the near-death experience from crashing that Impala as a sign to slow down. They saw firsthand what his reaction was to getting high. He took a very small accident with almost no repercussions, no citations, and he escalated it so bad. His friends all knew it. He knew it. He thought it. This is the pure definition of insanity, or an active addict. Oliver thought he was bulletproof. He wasn't. And then after I got Oliver's phone back, I tore into that. I tore into his computer, and the police did too. We found many disturbing videos, pictures, text. There was many pictures of Oliver doing LSD, drinking alcohol, smoking weed. Half the videos of him doing this stuff were taken at people's houses and at this place by Forbes Lake. These houses looked like they were parents' houses. And they had all the stuff out. So either the parents didn't care or they weren't home. So take that for what it's worth. After some more investigation, after all this, I found out there were a couple parents that didn't have a problem with them drinking at the house. And that's all fine and dandy if that's your choice, but please, for the love of God, let me know and all the other parents know that that's your choice, because I would have a different belief system, because I was born and raised in that and have seen death as the cause. It's not acceptable to me. Maybe it is to everybody else. Also on the phone, we found videos of Oliver and his friends climbing construction cranes, breaking into construction sites, spray painting houses, taking political signs, egging people's houses. Just know that if your son or daughter spent some serious time with Oliver, you should be very concerned, because there's a lot of this. They did a lot of things that I would never have expected. Also, in looking through his phone, I found that these core group of kids, 16 of them, were exchanging money back and forth through Venmo, and they had to. It's just, I don't know what they were buying. I don't know what they were selling, but I doubt if they were Beanie Babies. So if I had the opportunity to dissect Oliver's phone and computer before he died, I would take it in a second and let him worry when he was 25 that I was crossing boundaries. I regret that too. It's clear that Oliver and his friends were leading a lifestyle that we didn't know anything about. None of his parents had a clue, or the friends' parents had a clue, but Oliver wasn't doing this alone. He was doing this with a core group of people, and I'm sure they all were doing stuff like this. I've got videos of a bunch of it. I've spoken to some of these parents, and some of them are open to listening, but some of them are shut down. Please don't shut down. Listen, if you have questions, my email is on the slide. You can email me, and we get into more details if you want. I'm here before all of you to let you know what happened to this family, our family, my family. In all outward appearances, our family was great. Oliver was great. He'd hit a few bumps in the road. He had just been accepted into the college he wanted. He loved his family. He loved life. Sorry. Loved his brother, loved his mom. Drugs took a hold of him and destroyed everything and everyone that ever loved him. I thought terrible things only happened to people that came up in life the way I did. A broken home with broken parents that possessed no nurturing values. On January 3rd, I would have sworn that our family was living a perfect life, other than a few problems with my addictions in the past and my problems, and a few things that Oliver had done. But please don't be so presumptuous to think that this tragedy can't happen to you or your family. Please have a heartfelt conversation with your child, with your husband, your wife, with whomever. If you are that child, reach out to somebody, anybody. If you want any more details, my email's on the side. I'm speaking out because I want to be as loud as I possibly can about these three very important issues. A perfect storm happened that day in our house. Please take what I've shared to heart. Hold your kids, love them, but protect them with all the knowledge and wisdom you can find. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rob, for that. And I think maybe along with everybody, we'll just take a moment to take just a couple of deep breaths, and which is just reminding me again that these are the realities that we need to face and to deal with. And it's difficult to do that. And it's important to do it, but we need to find those ways to kind of take care of ourselves and quiet our own anxieties so that we can understand that combination of the mental health and the substance use and sort of what is confronting our youth so that we can come alongside them and support them in making good decisions, even if it means, as Rob says, that they are angry with you until age 25 about your boundary invasion. And there are ways to approach that, to come alongside rather than to kind of be, in somebody's face and other things. And we'll hear some more about that a little bit later. And now Kaylin is going to talk about the connections between mental health and substance abuse.
Yeah, so my name is Kaylin Griffith. I'm a licensed mental health counselor working with Youth Eastside Services. As Valerie mentioned at the beginning, I work specifically with Kamiakin and Finn Hill middle schools, supporting both in education prevention efforts. I do one-on-one counseling, but I also want to echo Christy's thankfulness of Rob. I think Rob's story is one of the greatest examples of why we are having this conversation, because we would much rather have a conversation like this that feels really uncomfortable and really scary than lose our kids. And that's really what things come down to. And my role here today is to kind of help illuminate the links between youth mental health, substance use, and how things like this might happen. And the best way that I know to go about doing that is just talking a little bit about coping to start out with. Coping is something that is totally universal. Every single one of us on this Zoom call knows some ways that we find for coping. It's very personal. And as a mental health counselor, like, there are definitely things that we suggest in a therapy room that are coping techniques. But those other techniques that everyone uses that just distract you, that ground you, that give you that emotional release, screaming into a pillow, all of those things are coping. And when we're thinking about coping on a spectrum, it really is between like this decision between like healthy and less healthy. Examples that I really like starting with are those things that a lot of us maybe are going to consider on the healthier end, like reading. Reading is definitely one of those things that many people are going to argue is going to be a good coping mechanism. And there's no way to unsee that, right? And at the same time, when I was a young person, I would spend hours reading. I would stay up all night reading. I would read during family dinner. There were certain ways where that reading was getting in the way of my functionality. And that really is what it means to have coping breakdown. Further along the spectrum, moving closer to unhealthy, I'm sure a lot of the parents listening have streaming sites at their home at their disposal. I'm a big fan of Netflix myself. I'm also a big video game player. For those of you thinking about your kids, I'm sure you've got your image in your mind of your kids spending a lot of time on these platforms, a lot of time on a streaming service, a lot of time on video games. And yes, there is very, very, very helpful coping in that. They are doing something to distract themselves. Oftentimes they're being social. They're engaging with creativity in a really, really valuable way. And I'm sure a lot of these parents on this call have also noticed that that goes into the less healthy and impacts their functionality too. Homework doesn't get done. Maybe they don't do their chores. Maybe it starts fights at home. Like, who knows? All of these things. And then we get into the classic less healthy end. And that's where the typically bad coping mechanisms come up a lot of those times. So substance use is really one of those big ones. I would argue that self-harm would also go into that category. But ultimately, for me, my personal philosophy and the way that I work with students is that substance use starts out as coping. There is no child with any ill intent when they pick up any kind of substance, and they really are just trying to feel something different. It is something cognitively different that happens in their brain, and they're looking for that experience. So oftentimes with all the youth that I work with, it starts with that experimentation. It starts with peer pressure, oftentimes. And peer pressure doesn't really look the way that we think about it looking. It's not so much that kids are like hiding in the like dark corners of their hallways, like with trench coats on, like try these drugs or we won't hang out with you. It's more just like if you're in a peer group and your peers are all off doing this thing, you got to choose either I'm going to go hang out with them or I'm going to be over here by myself. And that peer pressure is really, really in there and it's really sneaky. And the other thing about that is kids trust their friends. If they hear that their friends have tried these things and it's a really fun time and they don't know about the risks, then that thing, that message, that not being as dark and scary as the adults in their life think it is, that starts feeling really, really tempting. Along with that peer pressure, that means they get to be social and hang out with their friends. And the other thing is, we got to consider the context. I really, really love that Rob started off by saying like what his background was, because all of us affected others in this audience, all of us who have had substance use issues impact our families, we know the consequences. We know the outcomes. We've seen them, we've felt them, we've had to be with them one-on-one. But our young people don't have that experience. And a lot of the peers that are maybe giving them the exposure to these substances also don't have that experience. Maybe they don't really know what the long-term effect is, and they can't really emphasize the importance of that for their friends. And all of this, unfortunately, it leans on coping. It comes back to that, whether they're looking for just a different cognitive feeling in the moment, whether they're looking for just some relaxation to have some fun, all of those things are coping and they're looking for that. Unfortunately, it is in a deep unconscious part of coping, because I'm also willing to bet a lot of the kids that you talk to aren't going to be ones who say, oh yeah, I totally turned to these substances for coping. That's how I deal with my mental health. They might not know that that is part of their coping plan. It might be really unconscious and it might have made its way in there again, really, really sneakily, until it's at the point where their coping is really, really tied to that substance use. And oftentimes, since substances are so effective at really getting that cognitive difference, it becomes really effective coping too. And then all the other things that they learn for coping are no longer as effective and they no longer can lean on those things anymore. So thinking about, again, what Rob was mentioning about how Oliver maybe thought he was bulletproof, or he didn't think maybe he was okay and he was special and he wasn't getting affected by that. That is what every single teen I talk to thinks. They all think those consequences aren't going to come for them. They all think they're smarter than the last person they heard that story from. And that is a very, very human thing. Humans don't want to believe these big, scary stories can actually happen to them. And that is totally fair. So we set up these conversations with ourselves. We set up these expectations for ourselves where, hey, there are all these reasons why this happened to them and it won't happen to me. And that also goes into why when you have these big scary experiences, these big life or death moments like Oliver maybe had in that car when he crashed, maybe he found all the other reasons that that crash happened other than the substances, because in the back of his mind, maybe he had so many other times where he had those substances, hung out with his friends, had a perfectly great time, and nothing bad happened. And it really is all of those times where nothing bad happens that really builds that defense that the substances have in your mind, because then it really is about, it's just a fun time. And it's not these big dangerous things. Those big dangerous things happen because I made a mistake that night, instead of actually really seeing the ownership where it is. The other thing about substances, as we all know, is that they create physical dependence. And with every single teen that I've talked to that's ever struggled with an addiction, it really has been that that dependence came up on them without them ever knowing. It is something they didn't take notice of or learn to notice the signs for because they didn't feel comfortable reaching out to the people in their lives that could teach them about that stuff. Oftentimes because they're getting involved in it way sooner than the adults in their life anticipate. So they know that it's scary and they might get in trouble if they talk to people about it. So they don't get enough of that true information. Again, they're finding a lot of this information from their peers, from their dealers, the people that they're getting these substances from. The internet is also a great source for misinformation, as we all know. So that created dependence on substances, again, impacts that coping because you can't really choose something else because it doesn't really feel like anything else is going to work as well. And then you also don't focus on that development of other healthier coping. You don't know what to balance when substances aren't available. You don't know what to go towards if you really just can't think of anything that's going to wind you down in the same way that you think this substance might. And as well, our kids are cognitively at a level where their brains are not developed quite yet. So if someone is reaching out for substances and using those a lot, it might be that their frontal lobes, especially before the age of 25, are not developing in a way that's going to support them really leaning on those coping mechanisms or using healthier styles or creating a variety of those so that substance use maybe just doesn't become an issue. Because ultimately what it comes back to is there are adults out there that model substance use not being an issue. That's just the way it is. And that's because there are a lot of things that are different for adults than there are for kids. And we need to start making that really, really clear for kids. And also helping them understand that, yes, there are things about coping that are in here. And these are all of the reasons why it's not appropriate and why it could be really dangerous. And helping remind them of the risks and helping them just understand that those risks are a lot closer than they maybe perceive.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Kaylin. I want to highlight that what you're saying really goes to the need to have those conversations, but to be informed and have those conversations with our young people and to not have that turn into kind of a conflict, but where we can help them with that decision making. And you know, when we work with young people in behavioral health, which is really just a fancy term for saying we're talking about mental health and substance abuse together, and preventing and educating and intervening. But it is really a lot about helping them to see and realize the risk that they have, because as Kaylin mentioned, that they're still having their brain development and and as well as that, they're also primed at the age and time of adolescence to seek out new and novel experiences. That's how they learn and that's how they grow. And it's what puts them at risk. So there's a lot of ands to this. It's not just kind of an either or, right? And I really thank Kaylin for a side thing that you didn't say as much, but it was parents need this information, but it's also like, it's really important for youth to have this information and for us to think about kind of all the ways that we can get that to them and that we can continue to be in dialogue with them. Circling back kind of to that idea about like when you see something going on, trusting your gut and your instinct about it and having a conversation, taking the risk of saying, let's get some other eyes on this, let's talk to somebody about it, that whole sense of kind of the early detection, early intervention, which Officer Rob King is going to talk to us about next. Officer King, or King.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I am Officer King. I'm a police officer with the City of Kirkland Police Department. I'm currently assigned as a school resource officer at Lake Washington High School. And I've been working as a school resource officer for 9 years. Working in the school has been very rewarding. I get to see a lot of students who maybe struggle with stuff, have difficult times, difficult backgrounds. I get to see kids overcome circumstances that don't dictate how they will be. And that's been a wonderful, super rewarding part of my job. As a school resource officer, unfortunately, I've also lost several students in the years that I've been there to similar things, substances, weapons, auto accidents, lots of different things. And that's always tragic for me, especially because I look at, you know, an old guy who's been around for a long time and I see these young kids who haven't even moved out of the house. They haven't, you know, found a relationship and started a life and a family, gone to college, got a career. It's tragic when we lose kids, and I hate to get these emails and text messages in the middle of the night when these things happen. My role for being here tonight, my contribution to the forum, I have a short period of time and I have some contentious topics. I'm not going to talk about a lot of details on stuff, just sort of facts of here's what is out there. Here are the laws, here are the things, and not really looking to open up a discussion tonight, but just to let everybody know what topics are available, and the invitation for further forums or guest speaking at PTSA meetings or anything like that. That's basically just letting everybody know what the resources, what's available from the police department side. My two topics that I get to address today are firearm safety, because there's laws for that and it's a police thing, so I got that one. And then also talking about drugs, just what's out there, access, availability, these types of things. Being a school resource officer in the school, when these things happen at school, I hear about it. When one of my kids, and when I say my kids, I'm talking about 1,600 Kings, my middle schools, elementaries, all the schools that feed in that I will interact with during their school career and during my career working as a school resource officer, those are all my kids. And so when things happen at home, when things happen to them just when they're out in the community, I hear about these things, and I get to be that individual that could come alongside them and encourage them to do well and make good choices, because I'm not just the officer that responds the night of and then never see you again. I get to see you every day, 5 days a week in the hallway of the school. So that additional accountability, I do get to contribute to that, and I try to. Starting off with the firearm safety in Washington State, we had a recent bill that passed and made a new provision. We have an RCW, which is Revised Code of Washington. That's a law. So RCW 9.41.360 is a statute for community endangerment, and it's the unsafe storage of firearms. What that bill, which now became a law, is intended to do is to require gun owners to keep their firearms where they're not accessible by prohibited persons. A lot of legal language. Prohibited persons might be because of criminal history, it might be because of age, it might be because court mandate, because of mental health thing or a domestic disturbance issue. There's a lot of reasons why access to firearms might be revoked or temporarily revoked. And so this law is designed to keep firearm owners from making these things accessible to people that shouldn't get them. The law is there. The enforcement aspect is kind of depends on the circumstances for that. When somebody loses a loved one, it's not necessarily in the best interest of the community to go after someone like that because the loss is already great. So I'm not bringing this out there for people to point fingers or blame or say, why didn't you or you should have. It's not the point of this. The point is that if you are a firearm owner and you don't know, you need to have your firearms locked up out of the way where people can't get them. If you have kids in the house, if you have a brother-in-law who maybe had a emergency protection order and he's not allowed to have firearms, if convicted felon or something like that, any of those things in the household, you would have to keep it locked up where those individuals aren't allowed to get it. Most of us here, I think this has been disseminated through the school, so I think most of us have kids, and with kids in the house, we need to be responsible with that. Keeping them locked up might be in a safe. That would be one example. It could be in a locked box. It could be in a hidden compartment up high out of reach in a gun case where the case is locked. If you don't have these things and you're thinking, well, how do I comply with this? The Kirkland Police Department, we have gun locks, we have trigger locks, we have cable locks that could go through the action of the firearm, and we have these things, they're free. We hand them out. If you need those, you can contact the Kirkland Police Department by email. It would be, our email for that is training@kirklandwa.gov. You'll provide your name, your address, because this is something we extend to Kirkland residents, so make sure we have your address. And then with COVID, you wouldn't just walk in the lobby at the police station because the lobby's closed. So just email us with your address, with your name, and what type of lock you want, a trigger lock or a cable lock, and we will mail it to you. We still want to provide those. The City of Redmond Police Department, they have a similar program. I don't know their exact email, but if you contact them by phone or go to the lobby, they have a similar thing, and they will make sure that you can get a gun lock as well. So there's a mandate for that. The local police departments are providing for that to help you comply. And so that's a firearms component part of that. The other part that I want to talk about is the drug component. The drug stuff is very extensive. I fortunately get invited into the health classes, and all our freshmen are required to take health either first or second semester. And the health teachers, when we're live in school, invite me to be a guest speaker for a day or two. And I get to go in and talk to the kids about drugs. I tell some stories, I show some slides, just so they aren't totally unfamiliar with stuff. So if they're at a party or with friends and they see them doing something, they're more educated and they're able to make better decisions, hopefully. Most of the kids will have that by the time they graduate high school. It's a state requirement to have that health class. And as long as I've been in the school, I've been afforded the opportunity to come in and be a guest speaker. Aside from what I teach on my couple days, they have a curriculum in the school and the health program where they talk about drugs, the effect on the body, addiction. They have mental health professionals come in and people from rehab places. There's a lot of people that come in and the kids get firsthand knowledge with the problems with this, the facts behind it. The kids each do research on one category of drug. And so I think they're pretty informed. So my offer here is more to the community to say, it's not so much that there's drugs or what drugs are out there. Do we have certain drugs? Everybody has the ability to get drugs. Our kids, when they get old enough and we give them smartphones and they have access to the internet, they have access to apps, that basically puts the world in the palm of their hand. And if they go searching for stuff, they could find anything. And so the kids have access to whoever's selling stuff. They have access to friends to find out where they get stuff from. They have, as Rob mentioned, they have means of transferring money, payment, where you wouldn't even see a transaction hand-to-hand anymore. And so the social media made the world really small. So to think that your kids don't hang out with people or they don't have access to it, the world is really small with the social media, where the kids have access to all these things. So the accessibility is definitely there. The prevalence of kids using, it's been mentioned, and probably other panelists here will mention as well, kids are curious. Kids think they're invincible. They think, well, I'm just gonna try it once, and they don't understand the ramifications. We try to inform them when I have the captive audience in class where I get to talk to all the kids, to let them know there's a lot of factors in there. It's not just a substance that you're using, because there's lots of stuff out there, and kids at different times, things are more or less popular, things are more or less available. But it's more the kids having that desire to want to do that. That's what needs to be addressed. Why are kids looking to do these things? Looking at your history, if you have a family history where there's been substance abuse issues and you come from the same gene pool, there's probably a higher risk for that as well. And so informing the kids that here is your specific risk, and I can't tell you what it is, and your teacher and a guest speaker can't tell you what it is. The students need to assess for themselves. The parents need to have that conversation and let the kids know you are in a higher risk group. This is a problem. This could be a dangerous thing. Drug education stuff, I have presentations, not for tonight. We don't have enough time. I don't have enough time allotted to me to do drug recognition, introduction of paraphernalia and things. I do that for parents. I don't do it on an open forum. I'm not trying to let kids know what we know. So it's really just a parent informative session. So you know, if I see these things, behaviors, changes in academics and friend groups, being participatory in the family or less so, not that any of these things check the box, but changes in these areas check some of those boxes. And one box doesn't determine that your kid's using drugs. Many boxes checked means it's probably a good time to have that conversation. it might be a good time to go through the phone, to go through the computer, to go through your child's room or their backpack, go through the car, just to see if that's a possibility. The students' right to privacy applies to me. I am the government, I am the law enforcement, I am constrained by the Fourth Amendment and search and seizure laws, and I can't just go dig through your stuff or anybody's stuff. That's why we have these laws and rules. The Fourth Amendment applies to the government, to me as a police officer when I'm doing my job. It does not apply to Mr. King, the parent. It doesn't apply to you as a parent. You can go violate your kid's rights as much as you deem fit. And every parent has their own parenting style of how intrusive you want to be with your child. But when you're seeing these warning signs, when you see their friends that are doing things, when you see the changes in behaviors and you can't explain it, it might be time to start looking and digging around. And although it might be traumatic for them and they think, oh, no privacy or anything, we are giving them a great tool. We are giving them a very powerful tool. Smartphones, social media, access to everything on the internet. As a law enforcement officer, we have an entire division of detectives that work on child sex crimes. And the kids, when they're online in social media and forums and chat groups, are exposed to these things to be preyed upon if they're not careful, if they don't know what to look out for. And we don't get instruction books for all of these things that kids have access to. Likewise, when they want to explore drugs, the availability or accessibility of drugs, if they want to search what people online, who anyone can post anything, what their opinion is with the safety or not safety of that, they might be getting misinformation. So if we give our children these powerful tools that give them access and exposure to all these dangerous things, they need to have some parameters. Each parent who knows their own kid needs to decide what that is. I can't give parenting lessons. I tell you what I did, but every kid, every parent, every family dynamic is different. But setting up where those rules are, where those boundaries are, what you're going to allow them to do, how far they could go, how much privacy they're allotted, those are some things to maybe set ahead of time before they get these devices, to let them know, I reserve the right to look at your stuff anytime, no questions asked, just to make sure you're safe from stuff, from groups, from predators online. There's a lot of dangerous things out there. And our job as parents is to keep our kids safe. My job as an officer is to keep your kids safe at school, but that is only outside COVID times. It's only for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week while they're in school. As parents, you have them forever. You have them for 18 years to raise them and keep them safe and give them direction and correction to keep them going in a good way. So that's my encouragement. As far as the education component, the availability is there. Education in the school, education for parents, the offer is there. The PTSA at Lake Washington High School has been great to invite me in every few years. So if your kid's in the high school for a 4-year stint, probably somewhere in there, they'll have me come in and we could do the drug education talk. That is always open. I'm not the only school resource officer. We have them in all the middle schools and both high schools. And I think across the district, Redmond has them, King County has them out at East Lake. And so we have school resource officers. And part of our job as a school resource officer, specific from a patrol officer, is doing classroom instruction, guest speaking education. So that would be something that I would at least ask for Kirkland Police Department. I know definitely we offer this. And the invitation's out there for any parent group, forums after tonight, or for a PTSA meeting to get parents kind of spun up on some things to look for, or to look for in your own kids or your kids' friends, just so you know who they're hanging out with.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And we will talk a little bit at the end of this tonight about some upcoming educational events for parents and some for parents and youth. And I really think it's important that we continue to have this conversation and that we have this conversation with frequency until we all feel comfortable dealing with this very difficult topic and the integration of the two topics, so the mental health and the substance abuse. And as Rob was talking about it, being in the schools and working with the students, and one thing about the SROs that's also different, I think, from just a regular police officer, is that they're generally really interested in the youth and that they form relationships with them, and that youth look to them for information and guidance. And you heard that as Officer King was speaking to us. And next, I'd like to introduce Andrea Frost, who has worked in the Lake Washington School District for many years as a prevention and intervention specialist. And in doing that, in that position, as well as our behavioral health support specialists and the Evergreen social workers, they do a lot of cross work with the SROs and with the school counselors and other student assistant people, really trying to bring that kind of integrated approach to empower kids and to get kids' needs met. So encouraging you all to reach out to all of these people above and beyond this evening. And Andrea, I know, is also going to tell you about some educational opportunities. One I'm just going to mention, and she can tell you more about it, but which is the ADEC class, or the alcohol drug education class, that happens at YES every fourth Saturday. That is for parents and youth to join together. We've been doing that over Zoom since COVID, which actually has turned out to be a great way to have that education and conversation. And that is offered at no cost. And so encourage you all to check that out. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Andrea.
Thank you. And thank you to Rob and your family for sharing your story with us. And, you know, so that we can get this conversation started. So I want to preface it by talking about, you know, society has done a pretty fair job in the last few years working to reduce the negative stigma surrounding mental health issues, that it's okay to ask for help, it's okay to get help, it's okay to take medication to help, and to talk about it without judgment. By talking about mental health with your child, you can help keep the movement moving forward to destigmatize asking for and getting help. The flip side to that, however, is that the stigma surrounding substance abuse and addiction is still associated with a negative connotation. The movement in society to reduce that negative outlook is unfortunately very slow moving. And again, you as parents can be a part of that positive progression of reducing the stigma, just like with mental health. I was recently in a conversation with a coworker of how if you or your child or your friend or a family member had cancer or some other disease, most people would not deny that you should get help or that you may need different types of treatments or medications to get through it, and that it's okay. There is absolutely no difference. That is absolutely no different than substance abuse addiction, which is also a disease. And bringing up and talking about substance use addiction or specific drugs doesn't mean that your kids are going to take that information and immediately go out and start using. The whole point is starting the conversation with them, keeping it going, keeping it open, and keeping it constant will encourage them, maybe not right at the very beginning, but you know, your hope is that eventually it will. And it'll let them know that you're there for them and that you're interested in supporting their well-being. If they have started using or are experimenting, you're starting the conversation is an intervention into halting that risky behavior, because you're acknowledging it and you're letting them know that it's okay and that it's not okay to use, and that these are the reasons why. If they're using maybe more than experimenting, you can support them through intervention of seeking professional help together so it doesn't have to escalate to addiction. And if it already has escalated, you can talk about getting that professional support and treatment for them and for you as a family. This is all about shared learning experiences together. They learn it's okay to talk openly about these issues, reducing that negative connotation or stigma, and you're creating a comfortable space for them to ask you about anything related to drugs, alcohol, nicotine, vaping, addiction, and mental health issues. So how do you actually start talking with them? Ask questions, ask their opinions, ask them what they know to get the conversation started. This could look like, what have you heard about edibles? Or what can you tell me about vaping? Or what does genetic predisposition or use in the family mean to you? Or use in our family mean to you? What are your thoughts on the opioid epidemic? Or what have you heard about the Good Samaritan law? And I'll talk about that in just a second. There are also some great tools like websites and parent support groups out there for you to learn about, not just how to start talking about substances, addiction, and mental health issues, but also about specific drugs and their effects on the developing body and brain, kind of like what Kaylin mentioned earlier, ways to alleviate stress and cope without using substances, where to turn for help with mental health and substance abuse issues, and when to know if they or someone needs help. And this is where that Good Samaritan law comes in. So this law was passed in 2010. It's specific to Washington State, and the law keeps the user and the bystanders safe from prosecution. So what that means is, if your child is at a party, they're in a park, they're in a car with other kids, and they suspect somebody is overdosing, they need to call 911 and to get them help, immediate help. And when the police show up to do their report, make sure that they tell them that they called 911. They'll have a record of it on their phone. It'll keep them free from getting, like I said, safe from prosecution. So both the person who calls and the person who is possibly overdosing. It has saved lives. It will continue to save lives as long as we talk about it and teach others about it and continue to talk about it. So you can also get your kids interested in learning about and having these discussions with you by maybe turning it into small projects or playing some of the learning games they have online. You could ask them, okay, let's say this month, let's work as a family to talk about or learn about, marijuana and its effects and that type of thing. And maybe you can report back as a family, during Sunday family dinner or a family meeting you have during the week. But you want them to get the facts about substance use, not just things they've heard. And you want to make the projects small, not overwhelming or anything like homework, or you'll get that pushback. There are interactive scenarios, some with, caricatures for youth, just things that they can relate to or find more interesting. Some of these scenarios are related to different drugs or alcohol, nicotine, or addiction, as well as prevention. And they can include anything from like crossword puzzles or Kahoot interactive games, or many other activities that you can do together as a family. The point is to get involved. The bottom line is you want to increase your child's protective factors like parent involvement, communication, setting clear boundaries and limits with consistent follow through. This in turn can help reduce some of their risk factors, like mentioned before, peer influences, social norms, and genetics. The more protective factors a child is exposed to, the less likely they are to start using substances. And you're going to have access to a link to all these community resources, both for substance abuse and mental health. There's phone numbers, how to text for help, email, parent hotlines, all free, as well as websites where you can access the educational pieces that I've mentioned and interact with your children. You'll also have access to our menu of services, like Christy mentioned, that are all free for your students in Lake Washington School District. From, we do individuals, we do lots of support groups, and then also services at YES. And you can find out who your behavioral health support specialist in your school by either going to our website or asking your school counselor. And alcohol drug education class is a fantastic way, to spend time with your children. Sometimes we have whole households join us just to get the information and, put some of that so that they have it on hand when the situation arises, because if they haven't been approached yet to use substances or been around peers that have, they will be around it. So some key takeaways from this: just start the conversation, keep it going and keep it going some more. It probably may not be comfortable at first, but you are the parent, and it is so important to talk about this and then talk some more and keep the conversation going to normalize it. The more you talk about it and feel comfortable, the more comfortable your child will be to come to you with their own questions or concerns or situations regarding substance use, addiction, and their mental health. Also, be aware that your kids see your behavior and may model some of it. And not talking about these issues sends a message as well. Kids don't always have the facts when it comes to alcohol and other drugs, although they like to tell us they do simply because they have Google at their fingertips. But if you don't talk about the risks of underage drinking and substance use, your kids might not see any harm in trying alcohol or other drugs. And the Healthy Youth Survey proves this, as statistics show that kids perceive the risk of use of substances as low. They perceive it as being low when parents don't talk about it or set clear boundaries around it. So having this ongoing conversation allows you as parents to set clear rules about what you expect from your kids when it comes to alcohol and other substances. By not saying anything, you're sending the message it is okay to use.
Thank you for that. Setting your boundaries, letting them know what your value is. Apologies for that echo if that came through to other people. We're going to shift now and hear from Susie Kroll from the Redmond Police, but who works with multiple police departments, helping us really to kind of get centered on our takeaways. And I believe also talk a little bit about sort of that really important parent self-care piece that needs to underline this so that we can rise to the challenge of dealing with these difficult materials, having that conversation with our kids, and sometimes confronting our kids, and sometimes taking that step of insisting that we need to get more help and get more people on board and not keep it just kind of in the family. Susie.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak to you. I wanted to say that I tend to be the one that brings the practically implementable takeaway skills for here. And the first and foremost thing that I would like to say is that these types of conversations can lead those that participate and those that are listening to feel wildly hopeless, and that this is such an insurmountable task to even figure out where to go to from here. And for me, as a therapist, as a licensed counselor who's done crisis work for close to a decade, it's really important for me to emphasize that I give you power and autonomy. And I would do that with my clients, my patients. I do that with contacts out with law enforcement, and I would do that to anybody that I would be speaking to in a community forum. And so the autonomy that I can provide you is a paradigm shift and a perspective move. And the first thing that I would say for that is to provide you with an analogy, because I'm big on a continuum of action, whether it's prevention, reaction, and then adaptation. So when I think about this, I look at the idea that we're all standing along the banks of a river. And we know a couple miles downstream, there is a massive waterfall. And we're just enjoying ourselves, looking at the water, and all of a sudden, all of us see a bunch of baby bassinets going down that river. And we all would do what? I'm fairly certain that all of us would be jumping into that river, grabbing as many baby bassinets as we possibly could, because we know what's downstream. This forum shows us what can potentially be downstream. Really, really dire, terrible, tragic consequences. So we're all in the river and we're grabbing babies, but they keep coming. And invariably, we're going to miss a couple, right? We're going to miss a couple babies and they make it further down toward that waterfall. At what point, as adults, as caregivers, as providers, and first responders, do a handful of us get up out of the river, walk further upstream, and figure out where all the babies are going in, while still some remain in the river, grabbing who they can, and then adapting what we do to help care for them once they're out of the river? So my perspective in communicating with you is that we need to shift the idea that we go look for help once we spot a problem. We need to conceptualize the idea of mental health and awareness and communicating with our youth and our children and our friends and our family about substance abuse and mental health and firearms when there isn't an issue. We all did the stop, drop, and roll and the duck and covers ad nauseum in junior high, elementary school, over and over and over again. We didn't hear that message once. We heard it all the time. And I guarantee that even as adults now, if the ground shook, we'd all duck and cover, or we'd all, stop, drop, and roll if there was a fire. So we need to build in that intuitive muscle memory. And what we do that by is we set up what we were alluding to earlier, what Andrea was talking about, is protective factors. We get those kids so that they have connections And if it's not possible and safe in a family type of unit, then we get them in the community. We get them with a trusted counselor. We get them with a sports coach. We get them with community activities. We get them with people that you feel comfortable talking to, so that when nothing's wrong, our children are surrounded by supports they know they can reach out to. Because the more factors, the more connections, the more stability, the more safe places that youth can go, the more likely they are to reach out to those protective factors when things get bad, or when they get stressful. The other piece of that, when we talk about that continuum of health, is to really distinguish what that maladapting coping skill that parents have is, which is doing the, my kid's fine, this would never happen to me, head in the sand. And that is a huge survival tactic for almost every parent that I've ever worked with in a therapeutic setting. We have to believe that the children that we love and care for and are responsible for would never be in that position, because otherwise we'd worry our little heads right off our shoulders, right? So that's the first coping skill that I want parents to take a look at a little differently and say that this is actually maladaptive and it could potentially hurt. And that we want to reinforce the messages about mental health and counseling and substance abuse. If you think you need to do it when they get to high school, you probably need to do it at the tail end of elementary school. We do it a whole lot sooner than we really want to, because then your child, when faced with a choice, can make a solid choice and do that repetition of, hey, do you know what drugs are? Who are you going to be with? Who are you hanging out with? You know, if you see any of this, I need you to do this, this, and this. Here are the privileges that you might lose if you don't. Here are the things that you gain when you do. And reiterate it over and over and over again. I have a lovely parent that I work with who said that every day when she drops her kiddos off at school, she says, I love you, make good choices, and no matter what, you can call me. And she said it every single day for this child's entire school career. That's a lot of days. And at the end, toward her starting high school, she would get out of the car and go, I know, Mom, I know you love me and I can make good choices and I can always call you. And it was a little flippant on the child's side, but that message has been reinforced, right? And so for me, building those protective factors, reimagining and reinforcing those rules and those boundaries and those protective factors are incredibly important. And looking at therapy now, yesterday, 3 years ago, we go to a doctor for a physical, we brush our teeth and see a dentist. Therapists should be right in there helping you build those coping skills and looking at the coping skills, like Caitlin said, that you do that are distractions that may inadvertently be not so helpful in the long run, even though they're innocuous in the moment that you're doing them. We want to know also that our youth have the idea that they don't have to do any of this alone, and neither do parents. You absolutely are feeding the concern and the problem when you give mental health concerns, stress, a lack of coping skills, and substance abuse darkness and isolation to thrive in. If there are more people around that see it, feel it, hear it, touch it, live it, and can talk about it, the better. And if you're not one that can talk about it, then you reach out to the folks that have been on this panel that can put you in touch with somebody who can. That way you're prepared when and if something happens. And the last thing that I would like to leave with when we talk about that continuum of care is whoever the support system is for your child. Maybe they don't like talking to you. Maybe they got a favorite aunt or a sister, somebody that you trust also. Establish a no matter what clause. I don't care who you talk to, provided I know who it is. They don't have to share anything with me, that you tell them, I want you to have that space, but no matter what, whether you're crashed on the side of the road because you've been drinking, whether you are sitting in booking because you got arrested, whether you are talking to the cops in a park, whether your friend is doing drugs and you're wildly uncomfortable with it and you don't know what to do, your kiddos have a no matter what clause, and they can call and you will forego, or the person they call will forego the, what were you thinking? Oh my God, when I see you, you're in so much, none of that. The initial call is, we're gonna get you safe. You're not alone. We're going to deal with what's happening. And then at a later date, when all of the crisis and turmoil has subsided, then we deal with the boundaries and the cost, the consequences and what have you. But kids should know that they have a no matter what clause. And if it's not mom or dad or aunt or uncle, maybe it's somebody that they know if they call them, they will always get an answer. And somebody will be there at the end of that line. That way you have some power and autonomy and control and know that you've built these massive safety nets in way earlier than you need them. And my extreme hope is that every time you see your child off to a sporting event or prom or a day at school, that they look at you and go, I know you love me. I'll make good choices. And I'll call you no matter what, because I want that reinforced. And the last analogy that I'll leave with is, for those of you who have flown, you've probably heard the flight attendants tell you to put your mask on first before you assist your senior or aging parent or your child. And when I would first hear this, I would think, whatever, I'm going to help my kid before I help myself. That's that parental self-sacrificing, jump in front of a freight train, DNA built into us human thing that we do. But if you can't breathe, you can't help anybody. So in all of this, if you are feeling overwhelmed, in all of this, if you don't necessarily know where to turn and your head is spinning, as I'm expecting it probably is, make sure that you get your mask on first. Kids aren't the only one that need therapists. Care providers and first responders are not the only ones that need therapists. Parents and grandparents and families that have structured supports all can benefit. It doesn't have to be every week. It doesn't have to be a million times a month. It could be a once a month check-in. Your engagement in therapy can ebb and flow with the stresses that you see, but that can be your own personal, adult, no matter what clause. And if you build those supports in, and then you reach out to the school resource officers, the counselors in schools, the ones that are available in youth focused programs, even the counselors that are available in law enforcement that go out and can recognize some of the duality between maybe a law enforcement problem and a mental health problem, you will always get directed the right way. And also be a gangster about it and be stubborn. If you talk to somebody and you don't hear what you want to hear, or it's not helpful, find somebody else, because it's not a one-shot deal, and you will find the right fit for you so that you can make those educated decisions and support your children. Because the last thing I would ever want you to be in the position to do is wonder if you could have reached out and done something different. I want you to be exhausted in your search, in what you look for to help your younglings and your children, because if you can do that, they'll model that behavior for their friends. And you don't know, you might end up with a no matter what clause from one of your children's friends calling you because you're that parent. And if you have those supports in place, then you can model that, give it to your children. They can talk with them, their friends about it, know that they have that no matter what clause, and then that can be a support for someone else. And it may be enough of a conversation starter if you tell your child and they talk about it with their friend, and their friend goes, man, I don't think my parents do that. Hey, mom, hey, this person I talked to at school said blah, 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 blah. Can we do something like that? Better safe than sorry, better preventative and going up that river to figure out where the babies are going in. And most importantly, mental health and the awareness around therapy is just as important as the dentist and the physician. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself before there's any problems. We do driver's ed before we put a kid in the car. We start saving for college or sports programs long before we think kiddos going to school or going to a special trip. We save for vacations. We do all of this preliminary planning. Finding mental health supports and connections shouldn't be something we do once we suspect there's a problem. It should be something that we look at, that we say, I'm going to do this now as a means of maintaining health and wellness. And this is completely normal. And I am the same person that preaches this. And I always tell the police officers that I train at the police academy and the parents that I provide therapy to for their children. You're staring at a licensed mental health clinician who has a pretty tough job on occasion. I go to some pretty rough calls, and I see a mental health counselor. It's my ethical responsibility to manage my own mental health, and I model that, so I'm modeling it to you. If you have questions, feel free to reach out, but I appreciate everybody listening.
Thank you, Susie, so much for those very wise and helpful words. Really appreciate that. I think it's time we're going to turn to some questions, and Bonnie McDaniel of Balance in Mind is going to lead us with that. I think there were some questions that came in written and have had some answers, but might be good for other panelists to entertain. And Bonnie, I'll hand it to you and you let us know how to proceed.
All right, thank you, Christy. The first thing I want to observe, I've been taking a look at the Q&A tonight, and I want to just share. Several of you have said thank you to Rob for being here and how important it was to them to hear his story. Somebody wrote, you've been through so much, and the fact that you're able to share speaks to your strength and how much you care. I'm sorry for your loss. And I think many of us on the call are feeling that tonight. There was a comment that, so there've been several comments that have said, gosh, I wish my kids could hear this. And how can I make this available to them? It's mostly been responded. I just want to remind everyone that this recording is going to be available. We'll be sending out a follow-up email and the recording will be there, and it'll also be on Facebook. Let's see, there was a comment that someone said, and I think this speaks to a lot of people's experience on some level. I've had the conversation with my child, but I'm born in Mexico and they're born here in KC. They say I don't get it or I don't know because I was born in Mexico. So it's totally different than the system. And so I wonder if you could address that issue of cultural difference. And I don't know, as a parent, we were all born here in locally, but it still sometimes feels like, our kids are in a completely different culture. So I wonder if someone could address how do you work with some of those cultural gaps with your kids?
Right. Well, I'll say something, and then maybe Andrea and Kaylin and others might want to jump in. I think I want to concur with what Bonnie said, that it can be tough to talk to your kids no matter the culture. And as Susie was talking about, connecting up with another adult who is a trusted person, either because of their professional status and knowledge, or who is somebody that your kids have an easier time listening to because they don't have the parent-child thing going on. At YES and at other community agencies, we pay attention to trying to mirror our communities in terms of kind of the people who work with us and who serve the communities. So at YES, there is a Latino youth program in the Lake Washington School District and in the Bellevue School District. And there are also counselors who have both that same cultural background as well as the language capacity, which is sometimes an issue. And so I think that could be particularly helpful to parents. Val, you had mentioned before, and I think put in the chat about Sistema Escolar and their series in Spanish for parents on mental health and substance abuse. So people could see the chat for info on that.
The other piece that I would offer culturally is that this is a really good opportunity when your child tells you, oh, you don't know, you don't understand. It may be a generational thing. It may be a cultural thing. My mom is a first-generation immigrant, and I dealt with a lot of the same things. Silly examples, I couldn't wear the same outfit 2 days in a row. But my mom was very, very poor growing up and had one outfit, so she couldn't figure out why I had to waste outfits. Ridiculed at school, was a little tough navigating. For parents that are feeling that, this is an opportunity to reach out to the resources that we're talking about, but it's also an opportunity to say to your child, I don't want to make a mistake. I love you more than anything in this world. And for me not to make a mistake, I need to understand. And if you want me to help make good decisions with you and give you trust and allowances and freedom and autonomy, I have to understand what the world is like that you're living in. So help educate me. Make me learn it right so that I don't believe something wrong and tell you you can or can't do something because I don't get it. And put them in the driver's seat so that they have some power to tell you what that is. And then open that dialogue and do it again and again and again and again and again and again, even if you feel nerdy or dorky and you don't really understand, or you think you're that naggy parent. You're the parent. Nag away.
I want to echo something that Susie just said too, is that just let them be in the driver's seat. Don't question their reality. Don't question whether or not like their reality matches that you understand or not, because my parents would definitely come back at that with me and be like, I do understand. I'm in your life. I know everything about you. And teenage me would be like, oh, now we're going to fight about that instead, totally distract from the topic. So don't question the reality. If they tell you that you don't understand, there is a chance there's something about their story, about their worldview, about what's going on for them that you don't understand. Responding with that open curiosity, that validation that their feelings make sense no matter what's going on, that is always going to get you way farther in getting to hear anything from their perspective than any sort of trying to fight with them.
Caitlin's so right. And I would actually emphasize that there's a difference between understanding and agreement.
Yes.
So your kiddo could tell you something and you know in 10 years, heck, you know next week it's not going to matter because you have life experience and wisdom. But in that moment, it's the biggest thing in their world. So whether you agree or not about the seriousness of what they're telling you, you can at least prove that you understand. And then when the big stuff comes, they'll know you understand and they'll come to you.
So I just wanted to put in a plug for Sistema Escolar, which is a great group that brings native Spanish speakers to a Spanish speaking audience on a variety of topics. And they are right now in the midst of a 4-workshop series on mental health. The 2 that you've missed, one is on mental health, one is on substance use, are available on their Facebook page. And the next one that's coming up is on how to navigate the mental health system. So there's a plug, it'll be in the follow-up email. You will have an opportunity to take advantage of it, but absolutely want to encourage you to share that resource and use it yourself.
Mhm. And I know that the King County Library recently had a series that included presentations on mental health in Hindi and in Chinese as well as Spanish. I don't know if that's recorded, but there are offerings in the community as well as behavioral health therapists and substance abuse providers who come from all different cultures and have different language capacity. So the matter of reaching out for that, it's there.
And I just wanted to add that, researching, some of those websites or social media, whatever it is that your kids are interested in, go for it. Get a little background information yourself. But remember, my whole talk was based on, how to talk with your kids. It was very inclusive. So include yourself and invite them to be part of the learning process, just like, Susie and Kaylin mentioned, because it means a lot more when you actively, participate in their interests.
That's huge. And I'll echo that so the other thing that I do in my work life is that I'm a crisis and hostage negotiator with the King County Sheriffs. And one of the tenets that we always work with in a very big, stressful SWAT kind of call out negotiation is that we have to tell and show and demonstrate that we understand who we're talking to. And it's no different than with kiddos. If we don't demonstrate that we get it, and we don't take away the #1 biggest fear of our children, then it isn't going to happen. And the #1 biggest fear of your kiddos coming to you is, oh my God, I'm going to get in so much trouble. If my mom or dad or grandma or aunt or whoever finds out about this, I am going to be in so much hot water. I got to figure out how to keep my mouth shut and not let this get known, which is me again reinforcing the no matter what clause. No matter what, I don't care what you did, where you are, what you're being accused of, you call me. We sort that out and then later we'll deal with it. Don't worry about the trouble. You have to come to me, no matter what.
Yeah. Bonnie, back to you.
Yeah, so there is a question here that asks, what is the appropriate action to take, or what would be the action to take as a parent if you found drugs in your child's room? Is going to the police suggested, especially when talking about your child?
Andre, would you like to speak to that? Still on mute.
I typed a response, Andrea, unless you're not wanting to, you're on mute.
You said you already responded?
I did, but if you've got, you go take it right ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead and then I'll go right after you.
We're all so polite. So the only thing that I mentioned is more from a safety standpoint. If you find drug paraphernalia or what you suspect to be drugs in your child's room, I would caution not to touch it. And if you need to touch it to remove it, you need to be very cautious about wearing gloves. There are some substances that are transmitted transdermally, and I don't want you to get an accidental contact high because you touched something. I also want you to have really safe processes for potential germs or pathogens. I'm not saying that your kids are all sick, but we have no idea the origins of the substances that they have. So really have some universal precautions if you do find that. If you're having trouble identifying what you're finding, finding, you can look at the Poison Control's website. They have a really good directory for that. The FBI also does too, but if you are seriously freaked out about it and you don't want it in your house, you can definitely call the police and they can talk to you about, what to do, if they'll come out, if there's something that should be done for the circumstances.
But really, as I mentioned before, opening up that dialogue, with them about, what is this? What does this mean? How can we support you? How can we get you help? And, one of the first steps we always encourage parents to do is get them to a substance abuse assessment so that you can find out the full extent of, where they are in their abuse, or, is it addiction, and what best treatments would be, as far as moving forward to support them and you.
Great, thanks.
There's one more question that was asked, which I think might be an interesting one for the audience is, how do you know if your child's mental health provider is or is not effective? So you can determine if or when you should find a new provider.
Kaylin, I know that some of these have been responded to written, but there's a breadth of probably responses to each question.
Yeah, I actually also typed a response to this one. So that one's in there too, if this Q&A gets let out to anyone else. But what it comes back to for me always is that the therapeutic relationship is the #1 predictor for outcomes across like many, many studies. This has been well shown in evidence. If your kiddo feels like they can trust the person that they're talking to, if they feel like the person likes them, if they get along with them, if they feel when they're in the room, they are being heard and that is a helpful time for them, it's probably being effective. Other than that, you want to check in with the child's goals. Do they feel like their goals are actually being met, or do they feel like things have maybe distracted from the goals a little bit? Because ultimately, therapy is not supposed to be something you're in forever. It's not supposed to be this crutch that you build your life with. It's supposed to help you kind of build those skills. And then you've got the voice in your ear that's kind of guiding you on what to do. So if your kiddo's been in therapy for a really, really long time and you're not seeing any progress on those goals, that might be your first clue to maybe check in with them. See how that relationship is going. Is this someone that you're growing with, or is this someone that you're kind of stuck with? And going from there and seeing what they think. And especially if they don't feel like they have a great relationship with this person, maybe it is really time to move on and maybe see if you can switch things up. I'm also a big fan. I think other therapists are great resources. I love when my kids get to hear from other therapists too, because I think they will teach things in ways that I won't think to teach them. So you know what, either way, if you're feeling like things are maybe a little bit stagnant, it might be worth getting that other opinion, working with someone else, getting that growth, because that's just another way to do things too.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, because your child is going to go through developmental stages, and a therapist that was right for them at 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 is not going to necessarily be right for them at 13, 14, 15, 16, 18. So if you're not seeing a change in a behavior that you initially sought therapy for, if you're not having good communication with the counselor, in the sense that, and this gets a little muddy, at a certain age, kiddos' records are protected, and the child has to give permission for any of that information to be given to a parent. And that can play a role in how well you feel connected to that counselor, and if they're telling you anything that makes you feel confident in the process. The other piece of that to look at is there are pros and cons to having parents be part of therapy, either every so often or all the time, or maybe once every 3 months, or once or twice when something comes up. So having that discussion with a provider and finding out what their therapeutic approach is about maybe check-ins or meetings with you and kiddo, or just you, or if it's only going to be in a mandatory reporting sense, are really important to look at. But all of those things are important to check in. Are they meeting the goals? Are you not seeing a change in a behavior? Has your kiddo grown, progressed cognitively past the age of scope of practice of the original therapist? All things to consider.
All right, Bonnie and Val, I think we're close to the end of our time. And I know that Val wanted to speak to upcoming events, because we fully intend to keep this conversation ongoing, and assist all of you in continuing to address these 3 issues of the mental health and substance abuse and safety for our youth. Val.
I'm coming.
Okay.
Trying to get that. There we go. First, I wanted to just share that in the follow-up email, we will include links and resources and contacts to all of the folks that you heard from today. On top of that, let me start my slide. I wanted to tell you about the upcoming events that we have. And part of what we're going to also include is how do you get help for someone? During school hours, our answer is really quick. Start with your school counselor. YES and Evergreen social workers are able to provide suicide risk assessments. So if you're able to reach during school hours, that's the best place to start. Unless it's imminent danger, and then of course you want to call 911. I mean, this is a hard topic to cover, and it's one that I recently had an experience with where we were really concerned about someone, and my child came to me and didn't know what to do. And so this is why I want everyone else to have some starting point. So if it's during school hours, school counselor. Anytime, there's the 24-hour crisis line. It has resources in Spanish and English, and you can call for yourself, for your child, for a friend, and they are wonderful at helping you figure out what to do, and they have experts trained and available. If you want to recommend, like if your teen doesn't want to talk to an adult or to you, make sure that they know about Teen Link. 6 to 10 at nights, it's staffed by teens, it's for teens, and you can text, and the text number is there as well. And these are just great. There are places to go. If you don't know quite what to do and you're worried about someone, here are some places that you can go to get some support. It's also important that you, I've included like things that are very helpful to have in this slide, and that'll be in the follow-up information. You can read that, but basically it's ways that whoever you're talking with can get in touch with who you are concerned about. Okay, what you need to know is not over tonight. We have follow-up events planned. They're not all through Balance in Mind. We are working with our community, and we have several different groups that are going to be involved in this, but you can find out about them through Balance in Mind. And if you haven't liked us on Facebook yet, please do, because that's where we'll be providing updates and registrations, etc. So you've heard about Sistema Escolar. Their next talk is February 16th, Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. And they have a direct Zoom link right there. Following that, on March 3rd, Balance in Mind has a ongoing class for parents, conversation for parents. And this one will be focused on teen mental health. And Kaylin and Christy, who you met tonight, will be there for that one. And you do need to register. It's free, but you need to register for the Zoom link, and that's listed there as well, also in the follow-up email. NAMI, well, actually on March 9th, the Lake Washington High School PTSA is sponsoring a presentation on marijuana and street drugs. And they're doing this in conjunction with public health. So this will be one of those opportunities where you can really learn more about the drugs and what environment your kids are encountering. Following on that, NAMI Eastside, which is the National Association of Mental Illness, NAMI, and Influence the Choice, a local group, will be talking about understanding the opiate crisis and the effect on the community. And you can register for that one at NamiEastside.org. Again, all of these are no cost. And in conjunction with our local police departments, with Youth East Side Services, and we're hoping with some community groups like Seattle Children's. We will be having a Safer Homes talk as well in March, probably towards the end, just to talk about how you can reduce harm for your kids and their friends in your home and in their environment. Finally, at the end, there will be resources of where you can turn. You see a little preview there, and links to the slides will be posted. We want to thank everyone for sticking with this to this point and for your attention. And we especially want to thank our speakers tonight. Mental health is something that, well, I liked how Susie put it. You need to take it out of the dark. The more you talk about it, the less power it has. And so this is why we're having this series of conversations. Thank you for taking the time. The fact that you're here is important, and the fact that you're able to communicate it with your family, your teens, and their friends is also incredibly important. So keep the message going. Thank you again so much for being here. You can follow up with questions to Balance in Mind at lwsf.org. And with that, I'll let you go. Take a deep breath and hug your kids. Good night, everyone.
Night.